If you've been a documentary filmmaker for a while, then chances are you set up dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of interviews. And even when you watch Netflix series or HBO documentaries, a lot of the documentary interviews tend to look pretty similar. And then you watch something like a fiction film or series, and the lighting is more dramatic, the scenes are more dramatic, and I thought to myself, why can't documentary interviews look more like that? And so today we're going to take a scene from the television series The Bear, and then we're going to try to replicate the same look that they have in this show for a documentary interview. This video is sponsored by Ji-Yoon. So the scene we're going to be taking a look at is when the character Sydney is speaking with her father. And I chose this scene specifically because I just love the way the light looks when they cut to her father sitting at a table, and it could potentially be a documentary interview setup. So we can see right here that he's got a really nice key light coming from this side, and then also a big beam of light coming in from behind. I think in this case, that is meant to look like the sun, because this is a morning shot. She's about to head off to work, and so having the sunrise coming through the window is a natural look. Because this scene is an actual fiction film and they're talking to one another, the eye line isn't supernatural for something like a documentary interview, but in this exact shot right here, where he's sort of looking away from his daughter, then it could work because his eye line is looking in a direction where an interviewer might be, and you still have this really nice backlight. It's giving him a lot of separation from the background, and so we'll definitely try to replicate that as well. So there's the scene. So what do we see here? First is that we have a nice key light coming in from this direction, which is obviously creating a shadow on the camera side, so a nice reverse key. And then the most obvious components of this setup is that big bright light in the background over here, which is signifying that the sun is beaming through. So we'll definitely set up a light through perhaps one of these back windows to light myself. He probably has another kicker. Maybe that light is doing sort of that full backlight, but he does have a little bit more light that seems to be coming from the other side over here. And so we might need to add a third light to get that look. So camera angle is a little bit to the side. He's pretty center frame through most of the scene, but it's also a little bit lower. And then finally, this isn't a very dramatic look. It's not a very dramatic scene. And so it feels pretty light, pretty airy. So we might have to bring the room up a little bit in terms of the overall exposure. It's a fairly even exposure across the frame outside of the hot spots that are on the windows themselves. So I think those are the main 4 or 5 components that we need to set up. And then we'll take a look at the scene again and see how we're doing. All right, first step is to find the frame. And right now we have something that looks similar enough. We have a nice wood beam right here, which is on this side of the frame, and then a big bright window in the background, which will punch a light through. He has sort of those 3 windows that kind of go like this. I do not have that in my house, but I have a couple big windows back here, so we'll utilize those. And then he'll be sitting at a large table like this with a chair, and then he has a lot more stuff on this side of the wall right here, so we'll see if we can dress this area up a little bit, but otherwise, let's get to lighting this thing. So first step definitely seems like he's got a nice key light here that looks like it's motivated by a window. Luckily we have 2 windows here that can be that motivation. They're not nearly bright enough for the scene, so we'll set up our key light on the window side. And there we go. Now we have a nice key light, but they don't see as much table as we do, and they don't have nearly the amount of light spill, so we're gonna have to put the grid on this thing in order to control that spill, especially on this back wall and on the table. So let's do that now. Oh yeah, already looking much better and much closer to our example. Definitely a more dramatic look, but they have a lot of nice shadows in this frame. I tried to match the frame before we put on our light, but I can see now that we are a little bit higher up than their shot. They got a lot more of the ceiling, and it's definitely shot a little bit lower than what we have. So let's go ahead and lower this camera a little bit so that we can get something that looks a little closer to our example. All right, this is a good start. So I say we get our big sunbeam coming in through the window. Right now we have a practical in the background over here. They don't have one, we'll turn that off. And then we'll also set up a nice hair light to give us a little bit of a kicker. And that'll get us quite a bit closer to our example. So for the sunbeam coming in through the window, I'm gonna try out the Ji-Yoon X100, their new RGBW light, Cam Mackey inspired. I just put up a review of this a couple weeks ago, so take a look at that, but we'll see if this will do what we need to do in the background. So there's our light, and this may not be powerful enough. We might want something with a little more juice, but let's put this all the way at 100%. It's definitely creating enough backlight probably on our subject, but it's just not quite having the full effect that we want. So I think we're gonna need a more powerful light. Luckily, we have a much more powerful light, and that is the B500 from Zhiyun. So I'm gonna set this up outside. All right, this is a good opportunity to talk about today's sponsor, Zhiyun. Now, I actually reached out to Zhiyun to see if they want to sponsor a series of videos because I like their lights so much. Now they have sent me some lights to try out, including this B500, but I've bought the G200, the G300, their first X100, their X60 with my own money and love their products and use them especially for travel work all the time. Now, I've talked about the G200 and G300 quite a bit in my videos, but the B500 is actually one of my favorite lights and is my main key light for most documentary interviews. And the reason it's so nice is because while the head is a similar size other 500 watt lights, actually quite a bit smaller, but it also has no ballast. And so it's a fully self-contained 500 watt light. So this whole thing is all it is, and then a power cord. And so it's really easy to travel with. You could actually put this in a roller suitcase and actually take this on a lot of different shoots where it'd be hard to take as powerful of light as this one. So thanks Zhiyun for sponsoring this video, and check out the description below for 10% off your Zhiyun order. All right, so now we got the B500. Let's hit that on, see if that's brighter. Ooh, I like it actually. We got a nice reflection on the mirror, which is a cool effect. So that's looking pretty good. All right, so we have our beam of light coming in the window behind us, but it definitely looks a little bit warmer on the example. I think the key light's pretty good at 5600, but I'm gonna change that temperature to something like a 4500 and see if that looks a little bit closer. Maybe more. So pausing here because I actually really like the way this is looking right now, especially if you set someone a little bit off a frame like here. I love the little reflections in the mirror, and if I was actually doing an interview and talking to someone right here, then it would actually be a pretty cool looking interview. We might add one more kicker light, but right now I think we're pretty darn close with the lighting, and now we need to do a little production design. So I'm gonna try to fill in this wall over here that feels a little too bare right now. I'm gonna grab some curtains from upstairs because I think closing the curtains a little bit will allow the light to just diffract a little better and be a little closer to what we're looking at. And it looks like they have a hanging plant of some sort, so maybe we'll get some greenery up there. But let's production design for a little bit, and then we'll come back and double check our lighting. All right, for it to look the most natural, I'd probably be looking in this direction as if there was an interviewer there. And when you do something like this and compare it to this shot of the bear where he's not looking directly at his daughter, but instead down the table, then you get something pretty darn similar. Obviously, because it's a fiction show, they have a lot more budget for a production design and therefore can make the room look exactly how they want to. The whole point of this video was to try to light interviews in a way that more resembles the way fiction films are shot. And while I've matched it fairly closely, I think, let me know in the comments below what you think. This isn't exactly how I'd finish this setup. I don't have a great eye light, and I think there's some other things we can do to make this even a little bit cooler looking. So now that I've got to this point, I'm going to shift some things around and see if we can make this documentary interview even more striking. All right, so if I was being interviewed, this is probably where my eye line would be, straight in front of me down the table as if I was talking to someone. And so I'm just going to shift this light a little bit to give myself a little bit more of an eye light, perhaps add some negative fill so that I have a little bit of a darker side over here. And then while we were filming, I had a really nice reflection in the mirror behind me here. And so I'm going to reposition our backlight to get that extra little glare coming off that mirror because that looked pretty cool. And then maybe toying with a practical in the lamp right over here. This plants in here. All right, one thing I love to do in interviews is have practicals in the background, especially when you're going for a more natural feel, but often they are quite a bit too bright, especially for the exposure we have now. And so two ways around that is to use an actual light bulb in terms of like an Aputure B7C, and then you can control the light via an app, or much cheaper option is just to buy some dimmers at Amazon or Walmart or wherever you want to. And so I'm gonna throw this dimmer on there and just dim this light bulb a little bit. All right, so we didn't change a ton from the setup from the bear, but we did a few small things. First is we moved our key light a little bit more over so that we could get a better eye light so that when I'm looking at the interviewer, you can actually see that little light in my eyes, which just brings a little more life to the interview subject. We added a practical over here in the background. Again, a little orange. I'd bring my own B7Cs in order to change that color temperature. And then finally, we moved the light coming through the window just a little bit so that if I was moving around a little bit, you might get a reflection off of that mirror, and it just gives a little more dynamic look. Otherwise, some other things we could try is to change our focal length. We tried to match what the look like the bear was using, somewhere in a 35 to 50 range, but I think this could look pretty cool if we went a little bit wider and then got a little bit more of the table that I'm leaning on. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Sick. So there we go, opening up this 18 to 35 on the C70 all the way to 20 millimeters. So you're looking at about a 30 millimeter full frame equivalent. Is a pretty cool wide looking interview. And I actually really like very wide interviews, especially when you have interesting spaces like this that have a lot of visual interest. And it makes the room feel a little bit bigger. That lamp's now not right over my shoulder like it was when I was a little bit tighter. And so you just get a little bit more visual interest. And if I was still looking at an interviewer here, you'd probably still get a nice eye light, but you're also seeing quite a bit of the space around me. And this was a really fun exercise. It's kind of fun to try new things, to see a frame and try to replicate it so that if you do find yourself in a situation similar to this, that you have that in your repertoire and can pull that out of your toolbox. So what do you think? How'd I do? It's not a perfect replication, but pretty darn close. And what television series or movie would you like to set up your own interviews to look like? Maybe Blade Runner will be next. Single tear. Let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. And thanks again to Zhiyun for sponsoring this video.